Yeah, auspicious greetings to everyone. I would like to share my PowerPoint. Can the hosts share that?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Got it. Okay. I hope you can see the slides. Okay. So again, auspicious greetings to all. It is my honor to come again to share the Dharma with everyone, and of course, share what I've learned and what I've experienced when practicing the Buddha's teachings. So for today, I would like to take this opportunity to share with everyone this sutra called Pariyasana Sutra, which is in English we usually refer as the Noble Search. So this sutra is actually is within the middle length discourses of the Buddha. And the translation I'm going to use is from Bhikkhu Bodhi and Bhikkhu Nyanamoli. Okay, so this sutra, I've learned it before I actually renounced. And this sutra is the sutra that helps me to contemplate and really realize that becoming a monastic or renounced life is actually what I would like to devote my life, this whole life, in learning about what is the Noble Search. Okay, so when I learn about this sutra, it helps me contemplate on the differences between a noble search and the ignoble search. So during that time, I was still at university, still doing my applied accounting major back in those days. But I joined a Buddhist club where I had the opportunity to learn the sutra. And on top of this, I also learned about the Surangama Sutra. So both sutras helped me to contemplate deeper the meaning of life. And also from learning about the Noble Search, this sutra, it helps me look deeper into what is really life about, what we are searching for. So in this sutra, we know that the Buddha was in Savasti, okay, together with Ananda during that time. And then they were going for Armstrong, and after Armstrong, they took a bath, and then eventually they went to Brahmin Ramaka's hermitage nearby, and then they come across a few bhikkhus. They were discussing the Dharma. Of course, the Buddha stood there for a few minutes until the bhikkhus realized that, oh, the Buddha is here, and they stopped the discussion. And then the Buddha realized that, oh, they were discussing the Dharma, which is something very meaningful. So the Buddha actually continued on to sharing the sutras. In this slide, I kind of quote straight from the Majjhima Nikaya, translated by Bhikkhu Nyanamoli and Bhikkhu Bodhi. So in the sutra, it says, I just cited partial paragraph of it. So it says that monks, there are these two kinds of search, the noble search and the ignoble search. And what is the ignoble search? Okay, we start from ignoble search. Here, someone being himself or herself subject to birth seeks what is also subject to birth. Being himself or herself subject to aging, he or she seeks what is also subject to aging. Being himself or herself subject to sickness, he or she seeks what is also subject to sickness. Being himself or herself subject to death, he or she seeks what is also subject to death. Being himself or herself subject to sorrow, he or she seeks what is also subject to sorrow. Being himself or herself subject to defilement, he or she seeks what is also subject to defilements. So this is what the Buddha defined as ignoble search. Ignoble can also be translated as common, okay, which is something that every one of us have been searching and working hard. And sometimes we come across different experiences, different material things that we might want to have it. Okay, so this is what the Buddha defined as ignoble search. So what may be said to be subject to birth, aging, sickness, and death, to sorrow and defilement? So in the sutra, the Buddha continues stating the examples. Imagine this is like 2,600 years ago. So the Buddha said that wife and children, men and women, slaves, goats, sheep, foals and pigs, elephants, cattle, horses, gold, silver, those are the acquisitions are subject to changes, subject to birth, aging, sickness, and death, to sorrow and defilement. And one who is tied to these things, like tied here is defined as we cling on to it, we're so attached to these things, infatuated with them, and utterly absorbed in them. Being himself or herself subject to birth and aging, sickness, and death, and to sorrow and defilements. Okay, this is what the Buddha mentioned in the Sutra of the Noble Search. So of course, speaking of that, like birth, aging, sickness, and death, we know that the Buddha before enlightenment, he had learned from two teachers. One is Alara Kalama, is also an ascetic practitioner, where the Buddha before enlightenment, he has realized the base of nothingness when it comes to meditative concentration. So Alara, who is the teacher, was so happy for the Buddha. Okay, and then during that time, the Buddha before enlightenment, he still realized that there are times that one needs to enter into meditative concentration. And from first jhana, the second, third, and fourth, and until slowly, stages by stages, the mind experience deeper and deeper meditative concentration until the level of the base of nothingness. But yet, when the time comes, one will still need to come out of the meditative concentration. And thus, this is not nirvana. This is not realizing the answer, the solution to overcome both aging, sickness, and death. So that's the reason why the Buddha before enlightenment, he left Alara Kalama and went to the second teacher, Uddaka Ramaputta. So when he was with that teacher, of course, we know that the Buddha before enlightenment, he was very diligent in the practice, and he actually achieved even higher meditative state, which is neither perception nor non-perception. And yet, the Buddha during that time, he still realized that this is still subject to birth, aging, sickness, and death, to sorrow and defilements. It is because even though when a person experiences this level, this is already very high level of meditative concentration, even higher than the base of nothingness. But yet, one will come out of that meditative state, and one will come to the end of one's lifespan, and still within the cycle of rebirth. So it continues, the Buddha continued to share about the noble search. So what is the noble search? Here, someone being himself or herself, subject to birth, having understood the danger in what is also subject to birth, seeks the unborn supreme security from bondage, which is the nibbana or nirvana. Being himself or herself subject to aging, sickness, death, sorrow, and defilements. Having understood the danger in what is subject to aging, he or she seeks the unaging, unailing, deathless, soulless, undefault supreme security from bondage, nibbana. This is the noble search. So by knowing ignoble search and noble search, let us move a little bit before the Buddha's enlightenment, even before the Buddha renounced, Prince Siddhartha renounced. So every one of us know that Prince Siddhartha lived in a very comfortable life in the palace under King Shuddhodana, the father. There's no worries. That's whatever that he needed were given until the day when Prince Siddhartha went out of the palace wall and he saw a sick person, an aging man, and also a dead man where family members crying around that person. And eventually he saw a practitioner. So seeing all these sights, he realized that every one of us experience changes physically. We experience sickness, aging, and death. So, but why do we still live this life as if nothing will happen? So this is what the prince back then was thinking, until one day that he braved himself and approached the king, his father, and asked his father to grant him these 4 wishes. So Siddhartha mentioned to his dad, the king, if you can grant me these 4 wishes, I will remain in this palace and inherit this kingdom. If you cannot grant me these 4 wishes, I will move on and live a renounced life and try to find solutions to this cycle of birth and death. So the 4 wishes are, Prince Siddhartha mentioned, let there be no birth, aging, sickness, and death in this world. Is it possible? Of course not. The second wish, let there be no distresses of sorrow, sadness, suffering, and unhappiness. Is that possible? Not possible. The third wish, let there be no pain of separation from loved ones. Is it possible to have no death, no pain from the separation? Of course not. And the last wish, let everything in this world never change. So these 4 wishes was like written in the Sutra of past and present causes and effects. So when the king, Suddhodana, heard these 4 wishes from Prince Siddhartha, the king, with no matter how wealthy, no matter how many things that the king has, there's no way for the king to grant these 4 wishes to Prince Siddhartha. And then the king was thinking, this is absurd. This is, how can it be? It's impossible to have no birth, old age, sickness, and death. It's impossible to have no distresses. It's impossible to have no pain when the separation from a loved one. And of course, it's impossible to have everything that will never change. Everything changes. Okay, so because these 4 wishes weren't granted, the Buddha or Prince Siddhartha, okay, every day he kept on thinking and contemplating about this problem. And when the king declined the 4 wishes, of course, it's not really declined, but there's no way that the king can grant him these 4 wishes. That determines the prince to really go forward and live a renounced life and try to find possible solution to this global issue here. This like what we experience every day. Okay, so in the Buddha's mind or Siddhartha's mind, okay, he keep on asking, okay, before his enlightenment, like before renouncing, okay, while I'm still only enlightened Bodhisattva, I too, which is referring to Siddhartha, being myself subject to birth, so what is also subject to birth, being myself subject to aging, sickness, death, sorrow, and defilement, I solved what is also subject to aging, sickness, death, sorrow, and defilement. Then I consider this. Why being myself subject to birth do I seek what is also subject to birth? Why being myself subject to aging, sickness, death, sorrow, and defilement do I still seek what is also subject to aging, sickness, death, sorrow, and defilement? Only then Prince Siddhartha decided to leave the palace and leave behind the whole kingdom and live a renounced life. And with this photo, you can see Channa feeling very sad. But this is what the prince has decided. He cut his hair. He removed whatever adornments that he has on himself and changed the clothes to just a piece of cloth and continue on his journey in trying to find the truth of life. Okay. And then the sutra continues, suppose that being myself subject to birth, having understood the danger in what is also subject to birth, I seek the unborn supreme security from bondage, nibbana. Suppose that being myself subject to aging, sickness, death, sorrow, and defilement, having understood the danger in what is subject to aging, sickness, death, sorrow, and defilements, I seek the unaging, unailing, deathless, sorrowless, and undefiled supreme security from bondage, which is the nibbana. So with this paragraph, I kind of like try to understand based on what the Buddha shared with us on the Four Noble Truths about the truth of suffering, the causes that give rise to sufferings, and the way to the cessation of suffering, and of course, the cessation of sufferings. So being myself subject to aging, that is the truth. That is the truth about dukkha, separation from loved ones, not getting what we want. All this is dukkha. This is the truth of dukkha. Okay? Having understood the danger in what is subject to aging, we try, when we recognize what is dukkha, we take one step further in getting to know what gives rise to this dukkha. We try to understand the causes that give rise to it. It's just like what the Buddha mentioned. We as the sentient beings, whenever we experience the effects of our action, only then there's fear, only then there's precaution in our mind. But for Bodhisattvas, they're always being very cautious of the causes that they are about to create, the causes that they're going to make, the causes that are going to plant at that moment. So like every one of us, including myself, this is a reminder to ourselves that our everyday life, we really have to be mindful of the causes that we created, because whatever that we experience, it is not coming from the sky or coming from others, it's not coming from something externally, but it always starts from our own action. It always starts from our words. It starts from our mind. So by getting to know the causes, it helps us to really solve the problems in life. And of course, seeking the unaging supreme security from bondage, which is nibbana, which is like trying to find ways, like practicing the Noble Eightfold Path, how to live righteously, how to have right view, right speech, and so on and so forth. Okay, that is for us to seek the unaging or the unchanging and the truth of life. Okay, and I attain the unaging supreme security from bondage. Even the I here, it is not really referring to someone or something that we attach to or we cling on to. That is what we call the cessation of suffering. Okay, so looking at all the sutras that mention the first half of the sutra that focusing on the distinction between ignoble search as well as the noble search. And I would like to take this opportunity to also relate to what we have been practicing in Shan under the guidance of our founder, our teacher, Venerable Master Xing Yun. He's 96 years old this year, where his eyes cannot see. He can barely walk, sitting on a wheelchair all the time. But in his mind, he's trying to find different ways to be of service to others. And even after his stroke 3 years ago, he even had a brain surgery, where the doctor removed blood clot as big as a fist. But then after resting for a year, he recovers and he remembers, he can still talk, he can resume whatever that he has been doing every day. But of course, in Venerable Master's mind, he said that he's not sick, he's not in pain, but he's just physically inconvenienced. So among the teachings that he shared with us is like, we all know that the introduction of Buddhism has been over 2,600 years. It has been a long time since the Buddha's enlightenment until today. And Buddhism has been introduced to the 5 continents around the world, meaning in Asian countries, in Australia, in Africa, in Europe, in America, around the globe. We embrace different cultures, we embrace differences from our cultural background and our educational background. Every one of us interprets the Buddha's teachings as according to what we understand. So when Buddhism was being introduced to Asian countries, many people have too much emphasis on aging, sickness, death. Okay, from birth, aging, sickness, and death. Okay, and many people assume that when it comes to death, that is an end to this life. Okay, however, many people misunderstood the teachings from the Buddha. So that's the reason why Venerable Master re-emphasized this cycle of birth and death by putting birth or rebirth towards the end. Instead of saying birth, sickness, old age, or aging and death, the Venerable Master said that we can kind of like change the sequence a little bit. We can talk about old age or aging, sickness, death, and then after death, it is rebirth. After death, there is a new beginning. Okay, so even though we learn about the noble search and ignoble search, but we live as a human life here, we won't know how many lifetimes that we still have to move on, move forward with the Bodhisattva's practice until enlightenment. Okay, but then living this life, if we emphasize too much on life is suffering, life is full of dukkha, birth, old age, or aging, sickness, and death are all about suffering, then people, non-Buddhists, might think that Buddhism is very pessimistic. Buddhism is always talking about hard and long practices where life is full of suffering. But then what the Buddha shared with us is to help us realize that whatever that we pursue in this life, those are all upayas, those are all skillful means, those are all necessities in our daily needs. And always remember our teacher, the Buddha, when he first realized enlightenment, he shared with the 5 bhikkhus the middle path or the middle way. When it comes to middle, it's not really draw a line in the middle is the middle. when it comes to middle path, it is the emphasis of a balance in our lifetime, the balance in our daily life. Living as a laity, or just like those with families, you still need to work, you still need to learn, everyone still need to pursue one's career. But at the same time, one realized that there's a distinction between what we really want to excel in this life and what we cling on to this life. Okay, we have to understand that. Always going back to what the Buddha has done himself, living in a luxury life in the palace, indulging in all the what do you call that, enjoyments, and not thinking about putting effort in making one better, or in focusing on practices, or living in an ascetic practice for 6 years, taking only a grain a day, almost lost one's life. Both are extremes. Both are not the middle path. Okay, both are not noble search. Okay, so living this life, we still need to recognize the necessities. We still need to look at whatever that we do, whatever that we have, are the means to help us live this life as a human, so that we can continue on with our practice every day. But by knowing the distinction between ignoble search and noble search, it helps us to raise the awareness of not to crave, not to cling on to the things that is constantly changing. Always reminding ourselves, if everything is subject to changes, what is the point of holding on to it? Okay, when it comes to the definition of clinging or holding, it is like it deters us to really be present. Okay, when we are doing certain things, our mind is still thinking about the things that we cling on to. This is clinging. Okay, so, and sometimes people might have overstretched the life of living a simplicity life, and emphasize too much on the minimalism. Okay, meaning that one discard whatever that they have, live in a secluded life, up in a hill, up in a mountain, away from the people, away from the society, and only focus on self-practice. Again, this is not what the Buddha has taught us. Just let us just remind ourselves by reading the sutras that we know how the Buddha lived his life after enlightenment. The Buddha is always being with the Sangha. The Buddha is always going to the city, going to the village, talking to people, talking to the king, talking to the villagers and citizens. Every day, the Buddha has interaction with the people around him. And every day, whenever the disciples or anyone who has any questions, or even without questions, when the Buddha view that is a need to share teaching, the Buddha will always be there to share the ways that he have experienced before. And of course, the Buddha said that try it, practice it, and don't just believe it. Okay, so as a conclusion and reflections, even to myself, is when I learn and when I read again and again about this sutra on the noble search, it reminds us in this life, never forget one's initial aspiration. Whatever that we vow to be, no matter there's a lot of like desires, sensual pleasures that we experience from time to time. Sometimes it's inevitable, but then when we read the sutras, we read the Buddha's teachings, it acts as a reminder for us to stay focused on the noble path. It helps us to be aware of the possible clinging that we might have, and always remind ourselves to seek the unaging, unailing, deathless, sorrowless, and undefault supreme security from bondage. And we remain focused on this path. So thank you again. This is what I would like to share with everyone on the Noble Search. Thank you.